Hello, my name is Brian Sweeney. I'm a career specialist here at the University of Memphis. The presentation you're about to watch is a pre-recorded session about virtual interviewing that was initially part of the month-long Cummins Wilson School Career Expo. At the end of the presentation, you'll learn more information on how to schedule a mock interview or any other type of career-related appointment with me. I hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the presentation.
So these are some of the overall objectives that we have for today. We're going to talk about preparing for an interview and also what makes virtual interviews unique. So while this session is ostensibly about virtual interviewing, we're going to talk about interviewing in general. We're going to talk about how to respond to a variety of different interview question types, and then also how to follow up after an interview. There's going to be some opportunities to do practice responses, but given, wanting to fit a bunch of stuff into the time that'll be relatively limited, but hopefully I'll give you all some stuff that you can work on after the session to kind of continue practice interviewing skills. So to that end, our kind of agenda for today, we'll kind of go through the flow of an interview. We'll start with the preparation, and then we'll talk a little bit about types of questions you can expect in an interview and how to respond to them. We'll talk specifically about virtual interviewing and what makes it unique. Then we'll talk about following up, and then we'll have the chance to kind of go over some next steps for you all as far as, interview preparation and that sort of thing. So I like to break down preparation for interviews into kind of four main categories. The first is to research. So that is super important. A lot of folks, when we're applying to jobs, especially if we are, about to graduate from college or looking for an internship, we apply to a lot of jobs. And that's great because, you're casting a wide net, you're putting yourself out there for a lot of different opportunities. But it's important when you do that, especially if you're invited to interview, to make sure you do your research about the organization, the industry that organization is working in, and the position itself. So learn as much as you can about the company you're interviewing with. Go look on the website, look at not only what the company does, but how they talk about their company culture and their organizational values and all that sort of stuff. Make sure on a related note, make sure you understand the responsibilities of the position. We're going to talk about this later, but when you're asked interview questions, it's really a good idea to touch on things that they're looking for in the job description when you're describing your own skills and experiences. You also, in addition to researching about the organization, you may be able to find out information from the website or LinkedIn about the people who are interviewing you. So, I'm not advising you to stalk them, but learning a little more from them on their bio on the website is just a good idea to prepare for the interview. The next bullet is to outline your responses to different types of questions. And I want to be clear, you don't want to go in with a script prepared for questions you anticipate. Not only will that sound overly rehearsed, you'll also get thrown off if you get a question that you didn't diligently prepare for. But there are a lot of different types of questions that you can expect to get. We'll talk a bit more about that soon. And it's a good idea to think through what examples, experiences, and skills you have that could tie into those types of questions. So, just jot down some notes, some bullets of things that could be useful to touch on in an interview. Practicing interviewing is super important. Something I say to folks a lot is that it's unfortunately the way to get better at interviewing, the best way to get better at it is by interviewing. But you don't want to practice interviewing on an actual interview. So practice with a friend or a family member, schedule a mock interview with me, or record yourself answering interview questions and then look back at that footage. I know that last one can be scary to some people because a lot of people don't like to see themselves on camera. But in a lot of ways, that's ultimately most beneficial because we're often most critical of ourselves, and we can pick up on things that we're doing that we can improve on for future interviews. And the last thing is super important. Come up with questions to ask during your interview. When interviewing is often talked about and thought of as an organization asking you questions to make sure you're a good fit for a job. It's like you're the center of attention, you're auditioning for a role with this organization. The reality is interviewing is a two-way street. If you're being invited to interview, that means you're a viable possible candidate for this position. And so you need to make sure that an organization is a good fit for you and your values and your goals and all that sort of stuff. So asking questions during the interview is a really great way to get more insight into that. Some questions you can ask are things like, what does a typical day look like for somebody in this position? What is an ideal candidate for this role look like in terms of experience and skills and that sort of thing? Anything like that is valuable question to ask. And similarly, asking questions shows the interviewer that you are interested in the position. And oftentimes that's one of the most important things to them. They don't want just somebody, if there are two people who are going up against each other that have pretty similar qualifications and one seems way more interested in the job than the other, they're going to go with the more interested person 10 times out of 10. Any questions so far? I know I've already, talked about a lot of stuff and they'll continue to. So anyone questions so far?
Ryan, I got one direct question that came in to me. It said, do I need to have a headshot photo for Zoom interviews?
Good question. I would say, I would say you don't necessarily have to, but it's strongly, strongly encouraged. And my only hesitation is you want to make sure that you have a professional photo. I know someone whose LinkedIn photo is a cropped picture from his his undergrad college dance, where he's like, it looked formal enough. And he's since changed that, but that was his picture on LinkedIn for a long time. And, it's passable, I guess, but it's that type of thing that if you don't have a picture that really does look professional, and I'm not saying that you necessarily need to be fully in a suit and, with a taken at some studio, but you want something that looks really professional and put together. So I think particularly with virtual interviewing, because so much of that is happening on Zoom, it's a good idea if you have a picture to do that.
Okay. And then on that same note, we do recommend that students put their full name as their profile on Zoom. It's just another level of professional branding. So more and more of our KWS students are doing that. And I think it's because they're following the examples of their instructors and other workshops they've gone to. So definitely when you see something that looks good, if you want to replicate that, by all means, make that a part of your professional brand too.
Yeah, absolutely. And one note on that, I've met with a number of students on Zoom who are using a shared computer or a shared Zoom account, and I think I have an appointment with one student, and then the name that logs in is somebody totally different. And it throws me off. I can probably figure out that that's the situation, but if you just take a moment to rename yourself to your actual name, that's the most important. Just getting to that is a good idea. And also, if you have a name that you're preferred to be called. I met with a student the other day who goes by her middle name, and she had changed, in the system, that's not what came up, but she changed her name on Zoom to be the name that she goes by. And, I clarified with her at the beginning, and that's what she said. And that was great. So, it's helpful too to the interviewer if you put that on there. So great question. Cool. All right. So these are the 4 main categories of interview questions. The first 2 are the most common. And when I say most common, I mean they make up the majority of the questions you'll get in an interview. Traditional questions are things like your goals, your values, your overall strengths and weaknesses and qualifications for this position. They tend to be general in the way that they're asked, like, what are your strengths and weaknesses? What are your goals for the next 5 years, and how do you see this position factoring in? But it's always a good idea to give examples and be specific as much as you can. Something we'll talk about, you'll see coming up over and over again throughout this presentation is the value in specificity. So if you can give specific examples from your past experiences that relate to a question, always do that. It's always really important. So behavioral questions are more things like, tell me about a time when you did this, or give me an example from your past experience when this happened. So you'll see in this section right here, it says specific multiple times because being specific is important. But this question, they're asking for examples from your past experiences that could relate to something on the job. So highlighting past job experiences or coursework so much to the extent that it's relevant, whether it be working on a project or another type of question that's behavioral that you'll get a lot is something like, tell me about a time where you had a conflict at work or in a project. And in that case, if you don't have a work experience that lines up, I'm sure everyone who's done a group project for school has had an experience where there's been some sort of conflict or disagreement about how a project should run. So that's a good thing to say in that setting. And again, be specific. The next is situational. So these tend to be more, imagine you were blank. It's like giving you a hypothetical situation that you could experience on the job, in this particular job. So, you'll be given a real plausible situation and asked how you would handle it. And these types of questions are trying to get at your problem solving skills, your ability to analyze different situations and come up with a possible solution. These are also common interview questions. These tend to be, it's most likely that you'd get 1 or 2 questions like this, and the majority would be traditional and behavioral. And that gets into the last question type, which is case. These tend to be more for specific types of jobs. And if you have to do a case study, it's possible that you'd be told in advance. It's likely that you'd be told in advance of time. An example of this are more technical questions that like an engineering student or a computer science student might get, or if you're given a prompt ahead of time and they ask you to prepare for it. Another sort of similar thing that is like a case is if you're asked to come to an interview with a presentation prepared. So that's not directly a case type question, but it kind of fits in that designation. All right, so those are the kind of 4 overall questions. We're gonna watch a quick video next. So hopefully this plays. Looks like it's loading. If it doesn't, I can pull it up on you. There we go. Apologies for the delay, people. Any questions while this is pulling up? No? Okay. I don't know why this is giving me so much trouble. I might try pulling it up on YouTube. So hold on just one sec. Okay. sorry about that. So we're gonna watch this now. So while we're watching this video, take note, you don't have to literally take notes, but take note of what this person is doing and how they're responding to questions and what sort of presence they're giving off, because we're gonna talk about that a little bit afterwards.
Well, thanks for coming today. It's nice to have you here. Why don't you start up today by telling me a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, my name is John Smith, and I'm 20 years old. I grew up here in Minneapolis and went to Northfield High School. Right now, I'm going to the U of M, and I just switched my major over from horticulture to animal science. And because I decided I like plants more than animals more than plants. I'm sorry. I'm working at Target part-time right now, and just cover rent and food expenses. And I wanted to get this internship at your vet clinic because I'm planning on going on to vet school, and I need more experience on my resume and that sort of thing. So that's why I'm applying to your vet clinic internship.
What are your strengths?
Well, I'm really good at math and science. I'm really good in those subjects. I've gotten A's in all my math classes, and I think I've gotten like all A's and B's in my science classes. So, and I really like doing science stuff. I really enjoy that. So I think those are my two big strengths. And I'm also really good with people. My interpersonal skills are good. I'm good at talking to people. So I think those are my strengths.
And on the flip side, what are some of your weaknesses?
My biggest weakness is that I'm a big workaholic. I have to be working all the time, on the evenings and even on the weekends. Like, I just don't take time off. So, I'd say my biggest weakness is just that I'm a workaholic, always working.
Could you describe a time where you've had to complete multiple tasks in a short period of time?
I do that all the time. I'm constantly having to work on multiple things. I have 15 credits at the U right now, and all these classes, they have their own assignments going on. So I'm always doing different assignments at the same time. And I'm also working at Target, at the same time I'm doing my assignments. So I have a lot of experience, doing multiple things at once.
Okay. Can you describe a time when you've been in conflict with a coworker or a team member and how you handled the situation?
Okay, so I have a small animals class, and we got put into groups, and we had to do a group assignment where we had to report on some small domesticated animal. And we split up the parts of the report, so everyone had their own part. And then at the end, we kind of put all of our parts together for the report. And so we did that. We all did our own parts. But when we came together to share our work, it was obvious that this guy, Rick, in the group, he obviously didn't put a lot of time or effort into his part. It was really shoddy work. And so me and the other group members were really upset. We put a lot of effort into our part, but Rick didn't do his part well, and now our grade was going to be bad because of him. So I confronted him about it and asked him why he didn't put more effort into it, and he got defensive and started making up some excuses. And so I went to the professor and told her about it, and told her I didn't want my grade to go down because of his bad work. And so I convinced her to grade Rick's part of the report different from the rest of ours, or separate from it. So I think it worked out well.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. So that is the end of that. So I saw that there were a couple of things said in the chat, but does anyone want to kind of share initial thoughts? What are some things that, you know, what is he doing poorly? What are some suggestions that you would have for him?
Don't be nervous. And also, he took too long explaining himself or his introduction.
Mm-hmm.
He was like, yeah, my name is such and such. I'm from here. And it was just, and plus, he didn't have a lot of eye contact. I see that he was nervous, but still, he needs that eye contact. He don't need to be nervous. If that's the job that he wants, he needs to have the confidence.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of people struggle with that, with maintaining eye contact. We're going to talk a little bit later on. We'll talk about the particular challenge in a virtual setting, but I do think that's, you know, if people are lacking confidence, you know, eye contact is tough. If you're being interviewed by multiple people and you don't know who to make eye contact with, that can be a challenge too, for sure. Another thing I saw that you mentioned in the chat, Trey, was that he had his pen going and he kept scraping it along the table.
Kept on going back and forth.
Yeah. When I was in undergrad, I took a class where basically our entire grades for this class were doing these debates, and we had to give long, you know, presentations as a part of the debate, and we would get feedback from the other people in our class and our professor, kind of all collectively. And I remember my first time, I like really prepared, I put a ton of work in, and apparently I had a pen in my hand, and I wasn't tapping it, but I just kept kind of flipping it in my hand as I was presenting. And that's all that people could really take away from my presentation, because it was so distracting for them. I didn't even really know that I was doing it, but that's something that's really stuck with me, as like, be conscious of what you're doing with your body. If you're tapping, if you're, you know, holding a pen like that, definitely a problem. So Carol says to put the pen down and quit rocking in the chair. Absolutely. Erica said he was extremely monotone and rambled a little too much. Yeah, where you lost interest in what he's saying. And Shannon mentioned he spoke negatively about a fellow student and used the word shoddy. So the speaking negatively about a fellow student, that's a big one. One thing, you know, you're going to get a question like the one that he got, where they asked for about a time where you had to handle conflict or a difficult situation, and it can feel like you have to, you know, navigate. How do you talk about a situation where you may have had to carry the slack for somebody else or work with somebody else who didn't, you know, pull their weight? But there's a lot of ways to do that aren't what he was doing, where he named the person by name, which is not necessary to do for a number of reasons. One, it's not professional and not appropriate, but two, the person interviewing him probably doesn't know who Rick is. So what's the point beyond, you know, just being unprofessional about it? And two, you know, it's better to frame it as, you know, we had a conflict in working on this project, and, you know, talk about how you came to a solution. Trey, did you have something?
Yes, sir. And also another thing that I've noticed, also when he was talking about his studies, he was like, yeah, I took a bunch of math classes, you know, I got mostly A's and B's and all. But nah, if you're in a situation like that, just be like, yes, I attend the University of Memphis. I'm a sophomore. My GPA is a 4.0 GPA, and cut it off.
Right. Yeah, you don't, and you know, the things like your GPA and specific grades and things like that, it's likely, you know, it might be on your resume, but you want to talk more about what it is that what experiences you've had, the things that you've learned, as opposed to specifically what your grades are.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, how would me working for a company of yours benefit me from my experience for a long-term goal that I'm trying to achieve? Yes,
absolutely. One other thing I want to note before we move on is he was asked strengths and weaknesses, and for his weakness that he gave that he was a workaholic. Now, there is some truth to being somebody who is working constantly, that being a negative thing, but for an interviewer, that reads as trying to disguise a strength as a weakness. You're trying to get away from actually being honest and admitting a weakness and just saying, oh, I work really hard. And that doesn't come across as being a weakness. What I often say to folks to students with that question, because it's a really tough one, is when an employer is asking strengths and weaknesses, they're not trying to get you to admit something that is going to cost you the job, because it's unlikely that you're going to say something so catastrophic that for a weakness that you're going to be immediately written off. What they're looking for more than anything is self-awareness, because we all have things that we can work on, all have things we can improve on. And are we aware of what those things are, and are we working to improve them? So not only give an example of something that you could improve on, but what you're doing to improve upon that weakness is, a better way to handle that, instead of saying that you're a workaholic or a perfectionist or anything along those lines that could be read as trying to disguise a strength as a weakness. And I see some other good stuff in here about not being dressed professionally, didn't have a pad of paper to take notes. That's great. He didn't have a pad of paper, but he did have a pen. So I don't know what he was doing there. But good, great stuff, everyone. Thank you for your contributions. So we're going to talk a little bit now about, tell me about yourself. So I know somebody mentioned this question and his, kind of questionable response to it. So tell me about yourself is a question that is asked all the time. And it is one of the trickiest questions because it's super vague and really broad. How do you capture all of a person in 60 seconds in a response to a question? You can't do it, right? So there are many different ways to go about it. But the main things you want to focus on are your education, your experience and skills, and your goals to be in the way that they're relevant to the company and the position. So I'm going to ask that folks who are here, if you all wouldn't mind taking just a couple minutes to think of your response to this question. You can write out some, quick notes. You don't need to write out the full response, but if you want to write out some bullets, but what are some things that you would say if you were asked to tell me about yourself? And one note that I'll give before you all start doing this, in addition to these being the kind of main things to focus on, a piece of advice I often say to students is talk a little bit about, if you're thinking about yourself and capturing who you are as a person in just this really quick, response, talk a little bit about where you were. So your background, not talking about like, well, I was born and raised in this city, and then at 5 we moved here, but just like, where, if you want to quickly say where you live or where you're from, that's okay, but keep that part brief. Talk a little bit about where you are. So, if you've had some work experience, you're at the University of Memphis studying for this degree, and then talk a little bit about where you're going. So, you're graduating soon and you're hoping to work in the sports industry in this type of role, or you're looking for an internship that'll help you gain experience in this industry that you're really passionate about. So that's just something to keep in mind as you're thinking about your response. So I'll give you all just like 2 minutes to really quickly come up with what you might say if you were asked in an interview to tell me about yourself. All right, so just 2 minutes and we'll come back. All right. So that may not have even been 2 full minutes, and I didn't, I didn't want you to write out too much, but just hopefully to get some ideas for what you might say. Does anyone feel comfortable sharing what they wrote for Tell Me About Yourself?
Sure, I will.
Thanks, Cynthia.
So I said that I go to the University of Memphis. I am getting a degree in hospitality, and I'm, side story, kind of just assuming I'm interviewing for a hospitality job.
Mm-hmm.
So for experience and skills, I said that I was a server's assistant at Houston's, and that some of my classes actually go towards hospitality specific jobs as well, such as restaurant management or event planning. And my 10-year goal would be to be a team lead at an event management corporation.
Great. Awesome. That's great. Thank you. Thanks so much. Yeah, I mean, you touch on your experience and your skills, your education, and as well, and assuming that you're interviewing for a job, related to events and hospitality, that kind of long-term goal is definitely appropriate. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else want to share? Okay.
You must say anyone else?
Okay, yeah. Hey, if you want to share, please go right ahead.
Yeah, okay, I share. Hi everyone, I'm Trey Murray. I go to University of Memphis. I'm studying hospitality resource management. And I have my associate's degree in culinary arts from Pensacola State College. And from my experience and skills, I've worked at the Hyatt Place Pensacola Airport, and also dealing with the experience side of that. With the goals that I want to achieve, I want to run my own hotel to where I can focus on the youth, so I can stop the prevention of homelessness of the kids.
Okay, great. Thanks, Trey. Yeah, and when you're actually interviewing for a specific job, you can tie in what about that job relates to your long-term goals. But even just having those goals in mind and sharing them is a great idea. So thank you both so much for sharing. So okay, we're gonna move on now because I do want to be conscious of time. So we talked about this a little bit, but these are some common behavioral questions that you might get in an interview. So if we remember what behavioral questions are, these are questions that are looking at specific examples of experiences that you've had in the past that'll be relevant for this type of position that you're interviewing for. So some of the examples you might have are: tell me about a time you disagreed with someone at work, share an example of when you had to motivate someone else, be it your classmates or colleagues, tell me about a time when you made a mistake and how you handled it, tell me about a time when you worked well under pressure, and share an example of an accomplishment you are proud of and why. So you'll notice with all of these questions, they're not just asking you to speak generally about how you handle conflict or how you motivate people. They're talking about specific examples of how you did, of a time that you did whatever it is that they're asking about, right? And there's a lot of reasons for that, but when you're talking too generally about your skills and motivation, it can often come across as non-specific, not super relevant. And when you speak to an actual example of something you've done, it gives credence to the skills that you say that you have. It's evidence that you are good at motivating other people. It's evidence that you work well under pressure. So anytime, as I've said many times already, and I'll probably say many times more throughout the rest of this presentation, being specific and giving specific examples is really important. Any questions about questions? Any questions about behavioral questions? No. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit, I already got into this a bit, but we're going to talk about kind of the main way to respond to behavioral questions. So has anyone heard of the STARE method or the STAR method? They're both used pretty regularly. I'm seeing some nods. Okay, great. So if we think about the question, let's say, tell me about a time when you disagreed with someone at work or on a project. If you're responding to that using the STARE method, you're talking about, you first lay out the situation. So unlike the guy in the video, you're not going to say this guy Rick, who I was working on a project with, but you can give an example of, I was working on a project for this class, or working on a project doing this, just giving enough information to be clear, but you don't need to give any real specifics about who the people were or anything like that. And then you're going to talk about the task at hand. So if you were, and that can be the specific project that you were working on, but it can also be what the conflict was. So if you were working on a project and you had to do a presentation and you had a major disagreement about, the format of your presentation, that can be the task. Then the action is how you respond to that task. So if we're talking about disagreeing with somebody, how did you overcome that disagreement to still be successful? And one important thing that I don't want to get lost in this is, when you're giving an example, you want it to be one where the outcome was a positive one. So if you're talking about disagreeing with somebody on a class project, don't talk about one where you ultimately got a really bad grade and your presentation fell apart, because you want to talk about one where you handled it maturely, and the outcome of the situation was positive. So and that gets into the result. So talk about the outcome of that situation and what your contribution was. And then finally, look back at the situation and talk a little bit about, if you have something, what you could have done better or differently. So, and this is a good way to, if you talk about, well, we came up with a good compromise, so that would fit both of our ideas for this presentation. But had I done it again, if I could do it again, this is what I would have done differently. Any questions about the STARE method or responding to behavioral questions? I know it's a lot of information. As you all know, this is being recorded, so you can look back at this afterwards. And also, I'm always here to answer questions, so please feel free to reach out with any. Doesn't mean it's the end of the presentation.
I jotted one question down just out of curiosity, like, what is really the toughest interview question you've ever gotten? Because some of them are out there. I once got cut off with one that was like, tell me a joke. And
that's tough.
So I was caught off guard there.
Yeah.
What are some tough ones that you've been thrown?
I had one that was, what part of a bicycle, like if you were a part of a bicycle, what part would you be? And that was really tough, because not only, because it's metaphorical, like it's obviously not literally what type of, what are you most like, but it's, what attributes of yourself are most akin to attributes of a part of a bicycle. And I can't remember this was years ago now, and I can't remember what I said, but it really threw me off. And one thing that I think when we think of responding to an interview question, we think we need to just immediately start responding. It is totally okay to take a second to think about what you're going to say, because for a question like that, or to tell a specific example, it's okay to think of make sure you can think of an example. And if I'm an interviewer, if I'm working with someone who's like, oh, that's a really interesting question, like, let me think about it for a moment. To me, that shows thoughtfulness. It shows that you care about answering not correctly, but answering effectively, and that you're putting the time into it. It doesn't show, trying to come up with an answer. So I always encourage people to, if you need to, take a beat and think about it for a second, and then give your response. It's not going to look, don't wait 2 minutes, but if you need, 15 seconds or something along those lines, totally appropriate. And, this is going back a little bit, but another related thing, if you get to the end of, if you're going through your response to a question and you feel like you maybe lost the thread a little bit and you're getting away from what they initially asked, but you want to make sure that, you know, you're still answering the question, it's okay to finish what you're saying and say, does that answer your question? Or was that clear? Because you'll get one of two responses. Either they'll say, yes, that makes sense, or yes, that answers the question, and move on. Or they will rephrase the question to get at the specific thing you're looking for. Because interviewers are not perfect. They may have worded a question poorly. They may have, you know, not been clear when they were asking a question. So it's totally okay to make sure that you were responding to what they were looking for. And, you know, like I said before, interviewing is a two-way street. And in that same way, people say things incorrectly or make mistakes all the time. And it's okay to take a moment to respond or ask for clarification, anything like that.
Good stuff.
Thanks. All right. So we're now going to talk a little bit about virtual interviewing tips. There are, you know, a lot of things that are similar about an in-person interview and a virtual one, but there are other things that kind of make it a unique experience. So if you were here at the beginning, I think a little bit before we got started, I talked about how I interviewed for the job that I have now totally virtually. I was living in Boston at the time before moving down here. So I do have experience even in a pre-COVID landscape of interviewing virtually. And it is kind of interesting now to see how much that is becoming the norm. So these are some things both from my own personal experience and what I've heard and read from other people that will be really helpful in a virtual interviewing. So the first thing is to take it as seriously as an in-person interview. I didn't have an in-person interview for the job that I have now. All of it was virtually. So I had to take it as seriously. And that might be the same case for you. Be conscious of your surroundings and remove as many distractions as possible. So not only does that mean turning your, you know, your phone on do not disturb or turning it off completely, it means telling your family or your roommates, hey, I have an interview. Don't be like loudly playing the drums in the room next door while I'm talking. And also, you know, be conscious of what's behind you. So if you're interviewing in your room and you have a pile of clothes on your bed that need to be folded, maybe find a different spot. Try to find a neutral backdrop or something, you know, even you can have a bookshelf or something behind you, but don't have it be something that's so distracting for the interviewer. Or that might look unprofessional. Peggy asked, would you use a virtual background? That's definitely an option too. If I know some folks, Zoom won't always allow for it, but if you can use a virtual background, that's also a great idea. And also the suggestion of putting the pets away, Kat always likes getting in the Zoom screen. Yeah, pets can definitely be a distraction. So try to put them, you know, make sure they're in the other room when you're interviewing. So dress to impress. Even though it's a virtual interview and you may only be seeing like this small portion of you, it's a good idea to dress as you would for an actual interview. Not only is it the professional thing to do, but there's a lot of research that shows dressing like you're at an actual interview puts you in the right mindset for responding well and doing better in the interview. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but write your full name on your video, on your video conferencing platform, be it Zoom or Skype or WebEx or any of the other ones. Make sure you have your name written out. And that's, you know, if you're using a shared computer that may have somebody else's Zoom info logged in, just make sure you change the name for the interview. And elevate your computer to make the camera at lens eye level. You know, the one tip that I give for Zoom, so right now I have the video, because I'm sharing my screen, but there's a box with the other speakers on it. I put that directly under the webcam, and that way it makes it feel like I'm looking at other people, because the way to make it look like you're making eye contact over webcam is by looking directly in the camera, which can feel awkward because you may see somebody else on the screen, but you're supposed to be looking up here, and it's challenging. So especially if you're sharing your screen, you can put it in the thumbnail view and put that just directly below the webcam. And I think you can do that also if you're not sharing your screen. But that's just one way to make it to kind of best replicate making eye contact. So related to the being conscious of your surroundings, pay attention to the lighting in your room. You don't want to make it look like you are interviewing from inside of a closet or something. Make sure your lighting is clear. Get set up ahead of time and triple check your internet connection. You don't want to have your Zoom cut out while you're in the middle of talking. And also you want to make sure you have the link for the presentation, for the Zoom or the whatever web platform you're conferencing on. Make sure you know exactly where you're going, in the same way that you would map out how to get to an office for an interview. If you find yourself talking too quickly, slow down, take a breath, take a beat, try to catch yourself. That's a tip for virtual or in person. But oftentimes when we're nervous, our body responds by making us talk really quickly. So if you can catch that, try to slow yourself down and take a little more time in response. So I talked a bit about making eye contact. Try your best to do that. It can still be challenging, but just, don't have it, try your best to replicate that. My tip of putting the video up there should be helpful, but whatever works for you, try that. And smile is also important. In the same way that you would smile in an in-person one, smile in a virtual one. And if they send you any messages in the chat, have the chat box open just in case. It's always a good idea to keep an eye on that. So I know we are coming towards the end, so I want to be conscious of time, but does anyone have any questions? Marta had a great, go ahead, Cynthia.
Sorry. So on the first virtual interview slide, you mentioned having roommates and telling them, hey, I have an interview, we're trying to keep it down. So I actually have 2 roommates and I have 3 dogs. Oh. And even outside of my room and all of that, it's still a huge distraction. Mm-hmm. And so I remember, I think 2 semesters ago, someone mentioned having spaces on campus to interview. Is that still a thing, or?
It was, we did have that in career services where you could potentially use space on campus. I don't know, with COVID and offices being closed, I don't know that they're still having it. That's a good question though. I'll look into that to get more info, because that's, great.
I know there's book spaces in the theater department as well, because my instructor was like, if you have a class after this class, y'all can go to that space and attend y'all other class.
Right. Yes.
So
Yes, that's a good point. And you can do that with the library as well. I believe you can reserve space there.
And then for any students who are at the Culinary Institute, we have a few extra offices with the glass encasing, and I've actually set up a student there for a virtual interview before too. So there are opportunities, even if you're not on main campus, where you can get some quiet space.
Thank you.
And Marta asked a question in the chat. If you're somebody who talks with your hands a lot, how do you kind of manage that on Zoom? That's something just to be conscious of. I'm somebody who I kind of talk with my hands a lot, but you don't want to have your hands in front of your face when you're on Zoom. But you also, if you're somebody who's an expressive, who uses your hands to talk, you still, it's okay to try to capture that in Zoom, because that's how you emote, that's how you express yourself. So I would just say be conscious of it. Don't do too much. Don't block your face or anything like that. But it's okay to have your hands come up as they do. All right. So these are some. This is kind of how to dress for the interview and dressing for professional settings in general. I'm gonna basically say, unless you're specifically told by the interviewer otherwise, it's always a good idea to plan for business formal for an interview. Even if you know that the organization you're going to be working for is fairly, more on the line of business casual, it's always a good idea to dress formally. These are some, examples of what that can look like. There's tons and tons of resources online for, breaking down the different types of dress. So I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but generally speaking, unless you're specifically told to dress casually or not to dress business formal, plan on dressing business formal. So these are just some overall guidelines. In an interview, don't blame poor performance in a previous job or in a class on past employers, workplaces, bosses, or coworkers. It always looks bad to talk about it overly negatively, because the first thing that's going to pop into the interviewer's mind is, well, what are they going to say about me when they leave this job? So if you had a bad experience, frame it about what you learned from that experience. Don't blame other people. Avoid poor posture, use gestures wisely, which we talked about before. Avoid tapping your hands or feet or a pen, as we learned from the video, and always ask questions when given the opportunity. So we talked a little bit about this before. These are some questions that you can ask. What does your timeline look like for filling the position? What does success look like for someone in this role? What are some things, can you describe the ideal candidate for this position? And what are some things you enjoy most about the company culture? You can also ask questions like to get more information on how the person interviewing got to where they are, or what they most like about working for the organization. So after the interview, these are some things to do. You want to make sure you have everyone's contact information. In an in-person setting, that would mean business cards most likely, but in a virtual setting, just make sure you know who's been interviewing you and what their emails are, so you can send a thank you email. I had a situation once where I had to really do some digging, because there was I had a phone interview and one of the people on the call had not been in contact with me, and I did not know he was going to be on the call. And I could kind of make out his name when he introduced himself, but it was like cutting in and out. So I had to really do some digging to find it. So try to make sure you get everyone's contact information while you're still on the phone or on Zoom with them. Like I said, send a thank you note, and connect with those interviewers on LinkedIn. And if you haven't heard from them in a week, or or if they gave you a specific timeline on when you hear back, it's totally appropriate to follow up and inquire about the status of your position. And Peggy said, I've gotten several jobs due to sending thank you notes. I always encourage people to send thank you notes. It's thoughtful. It's what it is. It shows that you care and that you actually put in effort and time to pursuing the position you're interviewing for. So these are some helpful resources. I do mock interviews all the time with students, and I can tailor them to a job that you're interested in, or if you have an upcoming interview, we can tailor it to that specific job. So you can make that appointment on Handshake with me. We can do it over Zoom or over the phone, and we can record it and look back at it after, if that's helpful. There's also a lot of interview tips on Career Services website. I am going kind of quickly through this because I know we're at time.
I hope you enjoyed this presentation on interviewing and virtual interviewing in particular. Please reach out to me at my email listed there with any questions that you may have, or if you want any additional information on any of the resources I shared in this presentation. And if you want to schedule an appointment with me for a mock interview or any other type of career-related appointment, you can go to memphis.joinhandshake.com or just scan that QR code. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.